Hello and welcome to the Overthinking It TV recap of Game of Thrones Season 4, Episode 5, First of His Name. My name is Pete Fenzel. I'll be your cruise director on tonight's excursion into the north, the south, the east, the west, and all points in between, and I am joined by a fine cadre of Overthinkers tonight. Welcome to everyone watching us live on the stream on YouTube. Always exciting to be able to do this. Hope that you guys are having a great time. Remember to tweet at us at @OverthinkIt. Is Overthinking It? Overthinking. At Overthinking It on Twitter. And we will be watching Twitter in real time to respond to your tweets. And if you're listening to us on the audio podcast off iTunes or Podtracker or another podcast service, have faith in the people that are tweeting at us in real time. They are like you. They share your interests. And I'm sure they'll represent you well in the questions and answers. And yeah, if you're watching this in YouTube in a replay, yeah, you can just replay it. If you play this backwards, I'll actually say something about Jon Snow being the walrus. It'll be really fascinating. But without further ado, we have a full episode tonight full of all sorts of institutions and individuals and other assorted power mechanisms and skill sets, as well as basic tasks that people have difficulty accomplishing. So it sounds like another day at the office. But let's kick it around to everybody in the panel. And as always, although the Game of Thrones episodes this season have somewhat wandered away from the thematic coalescing, the thematic elegance that we would expect from, say, a Mad Men episode, or the thematic straightforwardness we'd expect of, like, a solid Downton Abbey episode, if any of you have a particular opinion about this episode, a weigh-in, an interpretive angle that you'd like to take to start the conversation off as I introduce you, I would be more than thrilled if you would share it with the class. Ladies and gentlemen, in alphabetical order, we start with Ben Adams. Ben, how are you doing? And you are the Ben Adams, the first of his name, King of Andals, the Rhoynar, the First Men, and the Protector of the Realm, Defender of the Faith and Protector of the Realm. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. I was deciding whether or not I needed to ride west and conquer today or podcast, and I mean to podcast today. So that's what I'll be doing.
All right.
But as far as a Downton Abbey moment, I had a couple lines that I liked that kind of seem portentous, and I think that gets away from the point of the Downton Abbey moment, which is to find something kind of small and doesn't seem quite as portentous that I think provides a way in. And so I have a question in my notes, which is just, what do I make of the lemons in the Eyrie? What about this line where they're talking about bringing the two boxes or 2 bushels of lemons? And I think this episode had a lot to say about kind of comparative advantage, that lemons are not particularly valuable, presumably in the Reach or High Garden where they grow, but they're extremely valuable here in the Eyrie where you can't grow them. And that kind of made me think about, Peter Baelish's line about, coming through that, 10,000 men couldn't conquer the Eyrie. Nobody's ever conquered it. Except that's what he's going to do right then, is he's conquering the Eyrie with a couple boxes of lemons and being nice to the people there, and he's conquering the Eyrie. And I think there's a lot of that in this episode of comparing and contrasting comparative advantage.
That's really interesting. Now, there is a long-standing, it's from the sort of book reader perspective, there's a contentious fan theory involving Daenerys referencing at one point, I don't remember if she ever says this in the show, that in the place where she grew up in Braavos there was a lemon tree, and lemons being a symbol for Daenerys, and whether the lemons actually came from Braavos or they came from somewhere else, whether lemons grow in various places. I thought it was interesting that while it's discussed in sort of fandom circles, the role of lemons, where lemons come from, where they're exported to. I was wondering whether that was a little nod to that in the show, but the way you describe it makes perfect thematic sense, that it's a situation of specialization, people doing what they're good at versus what they're bad at. And
since we're talking about the Iron Bank, economics is frontmost in this episode, but we can talk about the Iron Bank later.
Right, definitely. Well, let's jump to Shayna Wowski. Shayna, what's your angle? Are you on the lemon train? Are you there's no lemon.
Yes, sort of.
That's not what I mean. But anyway, go ahead, Shayna.
Yeah, you can't have a lemon party without old Dick, right? Liz Lemon, 30 Rock.
Liz Lemon, there it is.
Different show. My Downton Abbey, it was sort of related from a different angle. It was when Tywin was talking to Cersei about her marriage to Loras, and he says that they have to marry into that family because you make these alliances with people you don't trust. If you did trust them, you wouldn't have to marry them because you wouldn't need that kind of alliance because you already trust them. And this episode seemed to me to be primarily about trust and social power. So, like you were saying, Ben, using the lemons to make a friend. Like, it's sort of about like a gift-giving economy. Those were the only gifts that were given out this episode, right? Cersei gave Myrcella a ship, which I think is hilarious because it's in Dorne, mostly a desert. Um, what do you call him? Dario gave Dany a navy, which she is not going to use, but, nice effort, Dario. Um, so you have all these people sort of trying to win each other over with gifts or just with niceness, as you said, Ben. And even with regards to the Iron Bank, I forget if it was Tywin, it was probably Cersei, who said, oh, we'll just send someone over there and try to make a deal, like use our social power. Like everyone knows that we always pay our debts. We have, people have this idea of us. So we could just go and schmooze with this guy at the Iron Bank and he'll give us a break on the debts. Might not happen, but at least she thinks so. And of course, you have that final scene of the episode which shows what happens when you don't have trust or you don't have a social bond, where Craster's daughters, kill all of the creepy, rapey former Night's Watch people, which, previously they hadn't done, even though their husband was terrible to them, raping them all the time. But they did have a social bond in the sense of they were family, so they didn't, rise up against him in the way they're rising up against these guys now. So that is what I think the lemons have to do with everything else.
Oh, all right. Well, the lemon tree grows. So Matt Rather, what's your take on this episode? Oh,
until Shayna got to it, I was going to say you guys have your little lemon party. I'm going to, but she beat me to it. There are actually 2 lemon party jokes in 30 Rock. I think people missed the first one, and so they did the second one with Liz's father, Dick Lemon. The thing that I wanted to point out was the sense of I mean, I don't know, it's hard, as you say, because it's hard to pull out a particular scene because this episode doesn't have the kind of thematic unity that Game of Thrones episodes have had before, that Downton Abbey episodes have always had, and that we have come to expect, But it struck me that there were a lot of sort of secrets revealed. There was a lot of like hidden information that was brought to light from one character by one character to another. There's a lot of talk about like the power behind the power in this episode, right? Or the kind of the secret structure that undergirds. That undergirds a lot of the manifest content of behavior in Westeros, or as the Hound says, Westeros. So I don't know now whether it's whether you accent the first syllable or the last syllable. But in Westeros, they have they have like the Iron Bank of Braavos, right, as the sort of economic structure undergirding the whole thing, and the Lannisters haven't mined any gold in a long time. It was a good line from Tywin, right? Good dialogue writing. Is it ounces, pounds, or tons? It's the same no matter how you measure it. But the way he describes the Iron Bank of Braavos, which I thought was interesting, it's like a temple. And you pull one stone away. A temple is made of stones, and the people are stones in the temple, and you pull one stone away, and they just resettle, and another stone takes its place. It's a structure that's sort of adaptable. It's a structure that's sort of adaptable because of what we would think of as a weakness, right? Because of not being rigid. And I just sort of contrast that in my mind with Brienne's armor and the way armor was sort of foregrounded with Pod taking off Brienne's armor, being her squire, and also the Hound's armor, where Arya's small pointy sword couldn't penetrate his armor. and he was talking about Merwin Trant, right? Who had armor and a big sword, which is a dick thing, of course, but it's also like it's a dick thing, but it's also something that the series has given lie to before when Bronn, right, wins the duel up in the Eyrie, which was brought up again today, right? In the book, it's made clear that he has, like, I don't know, some leather clothes, and it's and not a big suit of armor, and it's in fact his superior agility and maneuverability that win that battle for him. He's adaptable. The Iron Bank is adaptable. It doesn't matter what the conditions of the world are. The Iron Bank keeps coming like a T-1000 that just sort of melts into a different form. I don't know if that makes any sense, Pete. What did you think was the paradigmatic scene from this episode?
I had the same one you did. I 100% thought the paradigmatic scene of the episode was Tywin talking about the temple and the Iron Bank of Bravos, and I think it works with everything that we've been saying. So it's about the shape of the institution that is maintained even as parts of the institutions come and go. The Ship of Theseus problem is one potential thing that's related to this sort of thing, right? And so if we go through, what are the instances of this happening in the show? Well, Joffrey is gone. That stone has been removed, and he's been replaced by Tommen. So that's one case of it, right? And then in Daenerys' case, she went into Yunkai and Astapor, and she kicked out the slavers, and she left, but then they just settled back into place, and they continue to do what they're doing, right? These sort of institutions that are happening. Gosh, and I'm trying to think of sort of the other examples. Well, like, Brienne keeps going and things change. Like what Podric is now squiring for Brienne instead of for Tommen, and is there some sort of continuity in what he's doing there? And also the sort of relentlessness of what Bran's mission has to be. According to Jojen, they're sort of seeing the future. This idea that Bran's quest is also kind of a temple that you can remove his individual stones from it. You can have things that come in and try to disrupt it, but it's inevitable, and he needs to go, and he needs to fulfill this particular sort of destiny. I think it's related to what Ben was talking about with economics and comparative advantage, that there are these relationships that are ingrained and that are structural, and that affect the way that people behave in large numbers or in association with the apportionment of resources. And these sort of ways of working together, whether they're institutional or they're informal or what have you, they persist even as individual people come and go. And so if the episode is about being the first of his name, it's kind of about legacy. What is your legacy? How do you build a legacy? How is an individual person capable of a legacy? And also on top of that, if you are an individual person who is seeking out to do things in your own interest, in what ways is the world friendly or unfriendly to that sort of way of behaving? So Cersei is the one who is at odds with this way of thinking more than anyone, because she's not okay with Joffrey being killed. She's not okay with Joffrey being replaced. And her conversation with Oberyn Martell that leaves him somewhat confused is about, oh, well, we have all this power, why can't we save the people that we love? And the answer is because there's stones in the temple. Like, if our power is derived from our place in the temple, then, and the temple maintains its shape, even as the stones are removed, then our power has nothing to do with the stones. It has everything to do with the temple. Now, the converse of that, with the metaphor that Tywin used, is that temples don't really work that way, right? Like, you can remove stones from a temple, but the temple is eventually going to fall down. Temples don't just grow.
Oh, yeah, but Pete, when the temple falls down, you can rebuild it in 3 days. I think we've established.
Fair enough.
Well, see,
yeah, go ahead, Ben.
I interpreted that metaphor a little different. I, too, thought it was a really great scene, but I interpreted that a little differently. I thought he was saying, kind of contrasting the way the Iron Bank works to the way a lot of Westerosi society works, because you get the sense the Iron Bank, it doesn't matter who I don't know what their corporate structure is, but it doesn't matter who
it doesn't matter who your board of directors is.
Right, it doesn't matter who the current CEO of the Iron Bank is. Like, you can send somebody to go treat with them, and you have a plan that, if you're going to, do diplomacy with the Iron Bank, your plan doesn't really depend on who's in charge when you get there. But that's completely different than Tommen and Joffrey, where it isn't just a one-for-one replacement with one stone fitting into the space left by the last, because Tommen is completely different from Joffrey. That's the So, and I think that that's the case with a lot of characters in Game of Thrones, where it's really, really important not that there's someone in that role, but that there's a particular person in that role. And that makes them amenable to blackmail and flattery and threats and bribery and all the things that Cersei, all the cards that Cersei is used to playing, and she wants to play against the Iron Bank. And Tywin is saying that's not going to work with these guys because they're just interchangeable stones that you can't get to just one guy in the Iron Bank and fix your problem. You have a problem with the entire institution.
That's, I mean, Pete, when Pete was talking about it doesn't matter, he was referencing The Rock, but it leads me back to Wyclef Jean's song, It Doesn't Matter, right? So also, right, exactly. Wyclef Jean featuring The Rock, I ought to have said. Right, like in the chorus, the last lines of the chorus are, if you ain't Sharon, people ain't caring. Come up in the hood and they take everything you're wearing. And that's what's going to happen to that. I mean, it's not. I'm not just being whimsical. I actually think that's right. Like Cersei doesn't want to share. And one of the remarkable things about Cersei in this episode, like I thought her scene with Marjorie, and we all thought her scene with Marjorie was going to go a completely different way than it ended up going. And I just want to call out, like, in a season that has had some sort of problematic, I hate the word problematic, I'm sorry, I'm banishing it from my vocabulary, that's had some bullshit with as regards the women. I just want to hang a lantern on Lena Headey's performance being, like, fantastic and bringing humanity and depth and nuance and texture to a role that, like, in the books is often like a shrewish harridan. She is just awesome, and just the kind of the sorrowful look on her face and the sense of resignation when she has that conversation with Marjorie. I don't know, speaks volumes. And then the second conversation with Oberyn, right, like, speaks volumes about the pain that she's been through, and really kind of what's made her the way she is, and why she feels like she only has recourse to the kinds of tricks, the kinds of exercise of power by exercise of soft power that she's known for.
Interesting. Shana, do you have any thoughts about this stuff?
Well, I liked your connection of this stone temple analogy, and connecting that to the Oberyn Cersei conversation. And I wonder if we could sort of extrapolate, if when a child dies, like in the case of Joffrey, that's one of the stones being taken out, and the temple or the institution of the king is still there. Okay, but then next what Cersei says is, okay, we can't protect our kids, but we can avenge them. So I wonder if in this metaphor that would be akin to just burning the whole damn temple down, which is, basically what happens at the end of the episode, where, Craster's daughters are like, we are burning this house to the ground. And I wonder if maybe this is the end goal of certain characters, like maybe Cersei, when you realize that everyone is sort of interchangeable and you can't protect the ones you want, you can't get what you want, even with your soft power, maybe the only recourse is to just destroy everything, even if it's your own family, even if it's the economic system of all of Westeros. Maybe that's the only path she can go down now. Maybe not yet, because Tommen is, he might do okay, but I feel like Cersei is maybe moving in that direction of sort of like the woman who has to watch the world burn, is what I'm hoping anyway.
There's certainly apocalypse all over this show, right? There's all manner of, like, potential apocalypses, people creating their own personal apocalypses, large-scale cosmic apocalypses, and the idea that in the what is it? Eye for an eye until everyone is blind kind of situation. I mean, if you think about one person can be replaced by another person, if you think about that as kind of the thing that's posited at the beginning of this little syllogism between Cersei and Oberyn, and then Cersei's like, well, we lose this child and we can't replace this child with another child, and then Oberyn's like, well, we can avenge them. What does that mean? Well, it kind of means replacing the dead child with another dead person, right? Like, and so, okay, like, there's a symmetry, there's a replacement that's happening, but you're not improving the situation, right? And this is the case where the temple is starting to come apart. But yeah, I think, and that's also something that Daenerys wrestles with, right? Like this idea of whether she's not murdering, but like whether she's destroying the slavers or whether she's going to rule Marine and Astapor and Yunkai, right? This idea of, should I turn toward this point where it's just scorched earth, right? Like it's something when she decided to crucify the masters, the wise masters or whatever they were known as, on the way to the next city, was as an example of something like that. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to pivot to a new topic, but if you have one, you go ahead.
No. I mean, I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased that George R. R. Martin and the showrunners have come to the conclusion that really the banks should run the government, because they clearly are not susceptible to a lot of the problems that the individuals are. So no, Matt, go ahead. You can jump to another topic.
It was better when we were still on the iron standard, isn't that right?
Got to pay the iron price with 0% APR. That's right.
Look, what if Tommen just securitizes all of the debt in Westeros?
And trenches it into like an A, B, and a C, Anyway, so you have these collateralized sword obligations.
The 7 tranches, the mother tranche and the strength tranche. You don't want the crone tranche, or the Smith tranche is like looks solid, but really, it's having some problems.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you wanna rebalance your 7 tranches automatically every quarter.
There is only one tranche. The account is dark and full of terror.
So it struck me how many times we have non-romantic male-female pairings in this episode, right? Like, oh God, let's do them. Like Daenerys and literally everybody, Natalie Dormer and Tommen, what's her name, Marjorie and Tommen, which I don't know. He I guess it's romantic in the sense that he has kind of a funny feeling down in his swimsuit area that he doesn't quite understand when she walks by, but I don't know. He's not capable of that, right? Like Cersei and Tywin, Cersei and Oberyn, right? These sort of the Hound and Arya. And on and on and on. I mean, we could just do Podric and Brienne, and we have these sort of alliances, right? And so much of the show seems to insist that the thing that men and women do together is get super rapey, and in this episode. There are these sort of non-romantic alliances. These pairings that are sort of task-oriented or goal-oriented, and they all have kind of built-in an instability. The one that comes to mind right now is Arya and the Hound, where she's at the end of his list of names. By the way, that wide shot while Arya is doing her sort of martial arts sword practice and down by the river, that like wide shot of the little valley or canyon or whatever that she's in. Man, I would like to go to Northern Ireland. Goodness, it looks beautiful, doesn't it?
I definitely, when I saw that, I definitely thought, she moves like the water. It's like I read in my notes that's Arya's Soul Calibur demo, and she's like the spiraling camera shot and the glittering water and the spinning around her head. It was all It made me want to mash buttons.
You know, there's a line from Yeats from the play The Long-Legged Fly, and he's talking about Helen of Troy, and describing her kind of dancing through Troy. And Yeats says she thinks part woman and 3 parts child that nobody looks. Right, and Arya kind of has this because she's on this cusp of being kind of made into an adult before her time because of all the killy that's gone on in her family, and
that's not a Soul Calibur reference. That's
right.
Go ahead.
And you know, and also like she sort of thinks that nobody's watching. She's kind of caught up. She's caught up in her thing, right? Like she doesn't quite yet, I think, understand her comparative advantage, right? What Littlefinger says about like know your strengths and like just play to your strengths. I mean, he's a master at sort of reading the terrain and figuring out the correct line of attack. And Arya, awesome though she is, kind of hasn't learned that, doesn't quite understand the kind of interaction that she's in with Clegane. What's his first name? Sandor. With Sandor Clegane, right? She thinks she's playing one kind of. She thinks she's in one kind of game, and she's actually in another with him. Ditto Daenerys, I think, right? Like doesn't understand her advantage.
It made me think while you were talking about this episode having a lot of couples in it, and then thinking still about the temple, and both Ben's looking at it as the individuals matter versus the individuals don't matter. It made me think about the Bear and the Maiden Fair episode, which is one of the structural episodes that drew a lot of attention on our recaps, which was about pairings where one person in the pairing desires the other person in the pairing, but the other person in the pairing has sort of a social divide or a sort of a lack of desire that makes the relationship asymmetrical, and there's this energy of desire and this desire for consummation, either literal or metaphorical, that follows a lot of the relationships in the show. And those relationships are like Jaime and Brienne and Jon and Ygritte, right? And then like that people are kind of chasing after these things, and Jorah and Daenerys. But this episode was more about relationships, and I mean relationships as in these are people who have kind of, even if they're just newly together, it feels like they've been together for a while, and whatever their immediate gratifications might have been at one point, it's not really something that they're after at the moment, right? So Cersei sort of submitting, conceding rather, that she's not going to get what she wants with regards to the resolution of her situation with her child, and I thought that the way that she communicated her desire for vengeance against Tyrion reflected a kind of lack of bloodlust. And it was much more sort of like, this is an inevitable thing that has to happen, but not much like, I want to kill him. But if you think about Peter Baelish being uninterested in consummating his relationship with his marriage with Lisa Arryn, if you think about the look on Jorah's face when Daenerys was talking, which was just like so kind of like, the lines on his face were just so massively like lit and made up to make him look not at all like he was posturing for a romantic interest, much more like he has been through this great deal of suffering and difficulty with her, a different sort of history. And even Podric and Brienne, there's a familiarity that is established through their talking, which is much more about like, we need to communicate and understand each other because he does all these annoying things that I don't like. Right, and he's like, I don't know what she wants, and I have no idea what to do with myself, and I feel ridiculous, right? Like, but they're not at the point where it's like, we're on an adventure and we're gonna fight. It's at the point where it's like, you don't even know how to ride a horse or cook a rabbit, and he's like, I know, it's my penis is too big, I can't ride this horse. I'm sorry, I'm Podric Payne. But yeah, it just seemed like we're at a point where people are learning to make do and move on with each other. Although I did to reference something you've said a couple times, Matt, and really calling out the at this point kind of flagrant schlocky and unnecessary rapiness of the world, which has gone past the point of necessity. When they showed the Night's Watch guy, like Carl or whoever it was, throwing that woman out in the snow, I literally said aloud, using the word you used recently, "Welcome to Bullshit Town. Population bullshit." Just like this story is happening. Don't care. And I'm glad that we had Jojen Reed with the magical power of the fourth wall to inform us that no, none of this happens in the books, so you can't go talk to Jon because then permanent things would change in the story, and we have to be able to get you through these filler arcs before you find the tree. What do you guys think about that storyline, about the Jojen visions, the sight, right? Like, I'll see you die, I'll see your body burned and covered in snow, his foresight with Bran and Yggdrasil, or what have you, the tree, the world tree that Bran is going after. What were you guys' thoughts about that whole subplot?
I always like when I always like when the Stark children have a near miss, because but the whole premise of this world is that we're going to kill Ned Stark in the first book, and this is not the sort of world that you think it is, right? This is not the sort of swords and sorcery, great chain of being, high fantasy world where everyone's honorable, and right, this is a world of where the people are stones in the temple, right? And they you knock them out and another one comes, right? And that sort of early death. I mean, early not from the point of view of the first book, which is plenty long, but early from the point of view of all 5 books thus far, which is plenty long. When the Stark children come into contact with one another, it sort of highlights the pathos of that, and for me sort of reminds me that that their reunions, you might sort of long for them to reunite and to take some kind of solace or to get some sort of increased strength, from the fact that they're reuniting, and alas, it isn't to be. I agree that I don't know, right? It seems that Jojen's power is that he's read the books, and that he knows how they end, or at least how they go up through book 5, but he's. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, getting captured at Craster's, I'm not sure. I guess you have to do something with them, because they do really just disappear from most of 3, and well, no spoilers, but you got to do something with them. But it does. One thing I'll say for it is that it provides an opportunity to have another one of these near miss moments.
Mm-hmm. And we got to see Hodor Unchained, which is always exciting. All you, Shayna.
Sorry, I wanted to sort of agree and sort of disagree with you, Matt, about the way Jojen's scene sort of, I guess he had 2 big scenes, but operated within this episode, because you were saying that it's true that this is a world that doesn't normally operate the way sword and sorcery fantasy stories work. It's supposed to be grittier, more realistic, or whatever you want to call it. On the other hand, Jojen is the one who is like the meta character, as you said. He broke the 4th wall, and you could see this tree behind it. And if he read the book, or he's the guy who sort of has read the book in this weird world, what he sees in the future is something that is more vibrant, less gritty than what we normally see. It's this big, beautiful tree. It's daylight. The colors are just very flashy. It looks like, like a Final Fantasy game or something. It does look like Bran is on the way through a gritty, terrible fantasy world that's not really like a fantasy world, but he's moving in the direction towards a more stereotypical or more idealistic fantasy world, if that makes any sense. The story so far has broken or sort of gotten around most of the tropes we associate with these types of stories, but there is also this future that we're looking toward that is a destiny, and destinies, that unless Bran doesn't actually live up to the destiny that Jojen has said, it is going to possibly become your sort of Lord of the Ringsy type story. Or do you guys disagree? Do you think we are actually...
You're a wizard! You need to go to wizard school,
yes.
Right?
like have
Westeros.
to meet the three-eyed raven, you know. It does seem like Bran and Jojen and Mira are kind of getting out of the Westeros we're used to and moving into a different story world, I guess is what I meant to say.
Yeah, right north of the Wall, where I don't know. Yeah, maybe all of north of the Wall. Maybe that's Middle Earth up there, and this is after like a long ice age that's wiped out Middle Earth, and they built a wall to keep Middle Earth up north. Maybe this is Lower Earth.
You know what they said in the Wall, right? Which is that if you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding, right? And how can you have your pudding if you don't eat your meat? That's from the Wall, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that was what Sansa talked about with her mom, right? Her mom was like, you have to eat dessert first, or don't eat dessert. I don't even know. What was the deal? Can we talk about Sansa and Lisa Aaron and that weird bipolar scene?
Wow, yeah. It's like, wow, I'm glad we didn't get any of the Lord of the Eerie breastfeeding anymore, because these people are just creepy sick.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. So like we saw, so it's funny because for me, upon reading the books, the revelation that Peter Baelish masterminded the assassination of Jon Arryn was a huge revelation, and it totally changed everything that happened in the story up until this point. And I felt like in this episode it just sort of showed up. Maybe it's because I knew it was there, but I mean, I watched the show with my girlfriend. Hi. And she didn't know that was happening, and she didn't seem particularly surprised. I mean, I had to explain it to her again because like the scene was kind of quiet and hard to hear. We had to change the volume on my TV a lot for this episode. So not kudos to the sound mixer or sound editor, whichever one is responsible for that. But very cinematic, which meant not particularly great for listening. But yeah, like what about that is like not really being a sort of climactic revelation and something they kind of throw in at the like third of the way through the episode.
Well, the thing that kind of threw me about that reveal was it's one thing Game of Thrones does very, very well for such a plot and exposition heavy show is having actually pretty good reveals and relatively naturalistic conversations, whereas this was your classic TV show like, I am character A, I'm going to tell you a thing that we both know is for the benefit of the audience, where it's just like, we both know these things clearly, but I'm going to mention it anyway. And so it just came off as very kind of TV-ish and exposition-y in a way that Game of Thrones usually avoids pretty well. And so that might have, detracted from the drama of the reveal a little bit.
Well, then, as you know, we're together on a recap here, as you know, and I'm responding to you now on the recap, and we're and it struck me that almost he sort of stops her by kissing her, by grabbing her and planting one right on the kisser, and it struck me that this was a move directed more toward the audience than toward any other character, but then to any other character that might be listening, because I don't think anyone was listening at the time. It's almost like, don't tell the people at home about that.
Well, it's funny, the words he used is something along the lines like, speaking makes it real, which in this sense is very, very true, because the only speaking in the context of a fictional thing is the only thing that makes it real. Like, he didn't poison Jon Arryn until somebody on the actual screen told us that he was the one who poisoned Jon Arryn. Like, that's right. So it's just, that is definitely a very self-conscious nod.
Did we not know that in the books? I forget whether we have that tidbit in the books.
We find it out near the end of book 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like it's a late in the game because Littlefinger doesn't show up back at the Eyrie until near the end of book 3, right? Because we're after the midpoint is the Red Wedding, and that's thus the third season is the first half sort of, and then there's Joffrey stuff and the Hound stuff and all that stuff, but yeah, it's like one of the climactic scenes at the end of the book. So, and we're not there yet, right? There's more that needs to happen before we really get to the big climaxes that hit there. But yeah, it was just interesting that was something that we only found out now, because we haven't heard that. I mean, Jon Arryn hasn't really come up in a long time too. I guess it's a little bit different when it's years, but then again, like, it was years between when the books were written. So so that's totally reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's something about pacing that you said once, Pete, kind of strikes me now, right? Which is that that book three takes a while to ramp up, but once it gets there, once you hit the red wedding, it's like it's going and going and going and going and going, and like sustains this level of awesome for a very high page count, right? And the series has more. The series has more. I don't know, moments of repose and sort of reflective moments. It doesn't just kind of have that sustained pace of and that has to do also with sort of following characters who aren't the point of view characters, being able to see other things, right? To see the conversation between Cersei and Marjorie, for example. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's a different kind of pacing, I guess.
Yeah, and they are. I get the sense that they're kind of things. The wheels are kind of coming off a little bit this season, in terms of the sense of control that they have over the narrative, right? At least in the first season, I felt like the story progressed in a very earned and organic pace, and revelations came at appropriate times, and there was suspension and tension, and it took like a lot of focus to maintain the inexorable march toward the Sept of Baelor, toward the pig gutting Robert Baratheon. Like, all that stuff sort of had to happen in its time. And then, Clash of Kings is kind of open-ended on both ends, so the second season does that to an extent, and it keeps following, but it promises there's going to be big climaxes later. And then the third season builds up, and it kind of steps one place and another in the middle, and then it hits the big thing at the end. And now this season, it's sort of like they're kind of all over the place in terms of the points of tone and what is this building towards? Like, what's the climax of the story going to be, right? I don't really see. I mean, I can know because I know what happens, what they'll probably pick as the climax of this season, but I don't.
You mean as episode 9?
Yeah, well, episode 9 is climax of the season. There you go.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think might be, so one thing I noticed about this episode is that there were a lot of decisions being made, kind of binary decisions. Most particularly, you had Daenerys' decision, west or east. She can stay where she is or she can sail west. And you had Bronn's decision, he can go south with Jon Snow or he can go north with Jojen Reed. And then you had less binary decisions, but still there's kind of the Lannisters committing to their alliance with the Tyrells. And you just have a couple other kind of decisions being made along the way. But they're not coupled with actions. I think a lot of times what makes the most exciting episode is where there's both a big decision being made on behalf of a character and a lot of action. So like season 1, Joffrey makes this huge decision to kill Ned Stark, and that there's action that accompanies that. And here we have a kind of a decoupling between the decisions that are being made and the action that's going to play out. Like, presumably Daenerys' decision to stay in Meereen is going to have cool battles in the future or something like that. But we don't have those yet. All we have is a woman in a room talking to her advisor saying, okay, I'm going to stay here. Yeah. And so it's a little less, it's harder to get excited about it at this point, at least.
So I've got a tweet in from Paul Packler, and he's asking us to go over a little bit. As someone who hasn't read the books, what are the implications of Littlefinger killing Jon Arryn? I didn't get the import. So that's something worth reviewing. Matt, do you want to kick into it? I can run through it too.
Yeah, sure. The idea is that Littlefinger actually kind of put the events of the whole series in motion, right? If you remember, the inciting incident back in book 1 or season 1 of the story is that Robert Baratheon comes up to Winterfell to bring Ned Stark down to King's Landing to be the Hand of the King because Jon Arryn has died. And there was that. There was actually an interesting callback last episode to that, where you see Joffrey with the stones on the eyes, lying in state, and we had that shot for Jon Arryn back in season 1, episode 1, though we didn't know who he is, and you would have had to be like a pretty deep fan of the series at that point in order truly to understand what was going on there. So So the idea that instead of the Lannisters, John Arryn discovering that Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella are not Robert's children because because the seed is strong, right? The power of the brown hair, the black hair always overcomes the Lannister gold in every pairing of a Baratheon with a Lannister in all the books all the history books that he reads, and in all of his illegitimate children scattered throughout King's Landing, born to blonde prostitutes. Right. We know that the three royal children have blonde hair, and so John Arryn stumbled upon this. We assumed that the Lannisters found out and that the Lannisters plotted to kill him. But now we realize that Littlefinger set in motion the whole thing that was the inciting incident for Ned Stark's arrival. And then remember, Littlefinger is the one who turned on Ned and got him arrested. And that set the War of the Five Kings. This whole thing was set into motion not by the perfidy of Cersei and the Lannisters, but by the scheming of Littlefinger. That's a very different spin to put on the whole story, right? That he has sort of set this whole thing in motion by knocking down the first domino. That was long-winded, but that's what I think the significance is.
Yeah, I think just to boil it down simply, Ned Stark. So Catelyn Stark got a letter from her sister telling her that Cersei had killed Jon Arryn, or that the Lannister had killed Jon Arryn. So Catelyn thought that Cersei Lannister killed Jon Arryn. She didn't. Catelyn thought that Tyrion tried to kill Bran. He didn't. Everybody sort of assumes that Cersei wanted Ned Stark dead. She didn't. It was an accident. Cersei was actually not in control of any of the major events, really, that led to the downfall of the House of Stark. She was unknowingly participating in a lot of them. This, to me, really relates to the line from Jaime during his big bath scene, the big fiery, steamy bath scene, where he says, by what right does the wolf judge the lion? By what right? In which he's claiming an equivalence. He's claiming a moral equivalence between the interests of the Lannisters and how they exercise them, and the interests of the Starks and how they exercise them. But at the beginning of the story, the Lannisters are set up as, I wouldn't say the villains, but the heels, right? And sort of using pro wrestling terminology. They're the heels. They're like the sneering and arrogant people that the crowd doesn't like. Like, they walk in and they're like, hey, Cincinnati, the ugliest town I've ever been to. And everyone's like, boo! Right? And then Ned Stark comes out and is like, hey, everybody, I'm Ned Stark. You all love me because I'm country. And they're like, yay!
Finally,
so
Ned Stark has come back to Cincinnati.
Yay! But Jaime is like, I don't understand why everybody thinks the Starks are good guys and I'm the bad guy because I'm the one who saved everybody's life. Now, this is part of why it's such a huge problem to have Jaime rape his sister for no reason in season 4. Because it's like, at this point, the story has been in the books. The story has been moving towards realizing that yes, Jaime pushed Bran out of a window, and Jaime also killed his cousin to escape prison, and he did a bunch of other bad things. But he's not the villain of the story. In fact, that we are eager to jump to the idea that the Lannisters are more of the villains of the story than they actually are. And that, in fact, like, history is kind of muddy, and you can't really know what happens. As Littlefinger says in this episode, speaking it makes it real. Okay, now the Lannisters aren't the villains. Now Littlefinger's the villain because he's the one who killed everybody, right? And so I think that's kind of the revelation, right? Like, I mean, even in this case, like, if the Red Wedding, right? Like, so Tywin Lannister claims that it's better to kill 1,000 people at 100 people at a wedding than 1,000 people on the battlefield, right? At a dinner party, rather, not a wedding specifically, but at a dinner, than 1,000 people on the battlefield or 10,000, right? Like, Tywin Lannister is sort of the opinion that the Red Wedding was like the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and while it was morally repugnant, it saved lives, and thus it was necessary. But it's hard to say that if the Lannisters are the ones who started the war in the first place. But they didn't. Littlefinger started the war. like he did it through machination, and it was a slow roll, and there were a lot of opportunities that a lot of people had to stop it from happening that they declined to take or screwed up. But ultimately, this whole thing has been Littlefinger's doing, and it's been his doing so that the regime sort of topples in upon him itself to give him opportunities to take advantage of the situation. So it's a huge turn. It's a huge transformation. And I mean, I think the show kind of tipped its hand a little bit by turning Littlefinger into kind of like, I'm going to talk like with my Christian Bale voice when I'm being villainous, right? Like, I'm evil Littlefinger, and, you know, whereas in the first season,
back with a different accent, didn't he? Like, he was sort of more Irish sounding and also villainous.
Yeah, exactly. So that is the answer to your question. I hope that it is satisfactory. I'm not getting any other tweets in from the Twotosphere right now. Does anybody have any other thoughts about this episode? I mean, we could talk about. I thought that it was really cool. I liked the Sancho Panza shots of Podric Payne. I remember making that note that when Brienne and Podric Payne were riding down the path, that Podric Payne felt very Sancho Panza-y, which would identify Brienne as Don Quixote, which says some interesting things about her role as being a knight and what might potentially happen in her story. Maybe, I'm not sure. But I thought that was.
There was an interesting set of reversals in this, right? Like Pod is the more kind of domesticated one. He is soft from city life, and he. I don't know. He tends to sort of hearth and home very badly, right? Like he did not kill that rabbit for sure, you know. But he's the one who's supposed to cook it up real nice. And Brienne only gets respect for him after he's like, yeah, I shot a man on the Blackwater just to watch him die, and that you know.
Yeah. He has a very specific squire's resume without like the typical skills. His resume is like, first bullet point, I poured a lot of wine. Second bullet point, I stabbed the guy in the head at the Battle of the Blackwater. And like, these are his two skills.
It's like, Pod, you're kind of burying the lead there. But that's, yeah. I mean, she's in the position of this sort of on the side of this sort of masculine violence doer, and he's in the position of this sort of cowering, you know, of this sort of cowering, sort of feminized violence receiver. And it's only when Brienne realizes that, oh, Pod is a violence doer as well, you know, she can accept him.
Yeah, I'm a lover and a fighter and a knocker out. Don't take him for a sucker, because that's not what he's about. But yeah, I thought it was fun. And Brienne's hair was looking particularly rough. Since we've been following Brienne's hair and her pants through the source of the entire series, or the entire season so far. So, Brienne hair update. It's not looking good, people. Things might be getting tough for Brienne in the hair department. Yeah, and then I guess what? Like Ghost and Hodor.
Dawn and Ghost back together. Hooray!
Hey, awesome, doggy.
I wanted Ghost to big lick his face there in front of all of Craster's wives and the brothers, and they would all gasp and be like, "That wild beast, he's tamed it!"
Oh yes, oh man. But yeah, I mean, I guess other than that, I think that we've pretty much gone through the episode. First of his name, you know, all of the legacies, all of the specializations, you know, all of the relationships, all of the stuff that really pulls this episode together, and none of the breastfeeding, which was good. And we didn't really get too deep into Alyssa Aaron's bipolar disorder, but I really don't feel like that warrants too much discussion. It's pretty obvious. But yeah, any last thoughts, Matt or Mark? By the way, Matt or Adam, but by the way, we lost Shayna. She was tragically killed by Peter Baelish through deliberate machination. No, her internet has crudded out on her, so she has not merely been quiet or silenced. She has been not here for the past 15 minutes.
But I think if Shayna were here, here's what she would say.
No, I think if Shayna were here, I think I have a pretty good idea what she would say.
Right.
We're just focusing.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So Ben, I wish I could zoom in this camera on Ben's face right now. Just his look of just total peace and total contentment. You know what you get? You guys are West Coasters. You guys are West Coast Game of Thrones watchers. Like, my brow is all furrowed. You can see where I've been like scratching at my brow with the anxiety of watching the show. But you guys are so chill, you know. Although, Matt, you need to get more sun. Well, you're out in L.A. if you're not getting any sun, man.
Yeah, and my sensitive pink, my Brienne-esque sensitive pink baby skin does not turn color in the sun, except red like a lobster.
All right, fair enough. Well, we don't have any lobster for you, but we have some delicious unskinned flaming rabbit. And if you want to share that with us first, or if you don't, either way, bring it on. Join us. Come on this journey with us. There's still a few episodes left. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening on the TV front. We still got Game of Thrones going for a few more episodes. We've got Community going for, I think, a few more episodes. We got 24. I skipped watching live the season premiere of 24, which I have been looking forward to for years, even though I didn't know what was happening, to do this recap for all of you. So I'm going to watch that tomorrow.
It doesn't matter.
I know. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, and I hope that it's good enough that it warrants discussion. I talked about the anthropic principle of 24 in my post that we put on the site last night, which is basically like, well, let's assume 24 is good, because if it isn't good, nobody's going to be talking about it, and nothing that we say will matter. But yeah, watch for that. And subscribe. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get our Eurovision content. Big Eurovision stuff coming up. It's American Idol meets the Olympics, but America isn't there. It's spectacular and crazy, and NSYNC is heavily influential in a lot of these acts. So yeah, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the podcast, the TV Recap podcast. Check out our mainstream podcast. We did a great episode about Star Wars last week yesterday for May the 4th. Which was Sunday, but we recorded it Sunday, released it yesterday. There's too much. The cup runneth over. The Overthinking It cup runneth over. So, to find all this, as well as the TFT podcast about teenage pop culture and music, which is where Matt takes the gloves off and goes Hodor Beast on everything that irritates him, because he's so civil on these particular podcasts. But there, he aims to confound. What are the terms you use? Confound and
Alienate.
Confound and alienate the audience. So if that's something you're looking forward to, check that out. And by all means, and by all accounts, please come to our temple, where there's stones for everybody. So, and you can visit us on the web at www.overthinkingit.com, where we subject the popular culture to a level of scrutiny it probably
doesn't deserve.
Hey, Pete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
I got 50 Bentleys in the West Indies.
It doesn't matter.
I got a pocket full of cheese and a garden full of trees.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, well, I'll crawl back in my hole then.
That doesn't matter.
My record just went platinum.
It doesn't matter about your platinum record.
I got like half a dozen Grammys. The Rock.
It doesn't matter about your 2 Grammys. It doesn't matter that you can't think of ways to extend this joke any further than necessary. It doesn't matter that this joke has gone on far further than necessary.
How are you doing, Mr. The Rock?
It doesn't matter how I'm doing.